Thank you, Charmaine, for joining me. And welcome back to Poo2Play, our podcast, which looks at the inside of the body as well as the outside of the body, looking at a real holistic approach. My name is Dr. Sam Ballington, and I'm from the Association of Child and Family Coaches, a researcher in early years and trainer in all things children, behaviour, and so on. Charmaine.
And I'm Charmaine, and I'm a continence sleep and understanding emotions consultant here at Clear Steps Consultancy. And I look at the holistic approach of helping our children with their toileting, sleep, and their behaviour and their emotions. All
Amazing.
very relevant, isn't
Absolutely,
it?
100%. Everything is connected. So that's brilliant. So today we're talking about something that, so many families worry about, don't they? And that can become quite emotionally loaded very, very quickly. And that is food. So today's title is From Fussy Eating to Focus, What Really Matters. And we hear that phrase, don't we, a lot, fussy eating all
Yeah.
the time. I say it about my husband, I say it about my children. But I think sometimes that label can stop us asking better questions and being curious.
Yeah.
Because those who've just joined us in this episode, we use the word curious a lot. We like to be
Do,
curious.
yes.
And
We're
those
very
who have
curious people, aren't we?
we are. And those who've been on the journey with us from the beginning know that we like to use the word curious. So we want to ask better questions. We want to be curious because when we describe a child as fussy, we actually accidentally make it sound like they're simply being difficult about food. But eating, and we know this as adults, is actually a really complex experience. It involves so much in terms of our senses, doesn't it? It
Yeah.
involves tastes, smell, texture, temperature, movement, predictability,
Yeah.
um, body awareness, appetite,
Yeah.
emotions,
And even
sensory
like, yeah.
processing,
So, and
and
even,
trust.
yeah. And
Yeah,
even before we actually, so some people just think it's just the food that's in front of you. It's just that food needs to go in there. It's just a simple there to there, just eat,
yeah,
just eat. It's not a big deal. But actually, when we sort of, you break it down, even before the food actually comes into the mouth, we're thinking about that cephalic stage.
yeah,
And that's where the brain um, excretes like uh, tells the gut that actually food is on its way. Food's
yeah,
coming. So it's almost
yeah.
like, and if you sort of have that sort of visualization of, whatever it is that you're into, I don't know. So if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, if you're sort of thinking about, that butternut squash and the tender butternut squash with the chickpeas and, the curry that you're going to have, and maybe, what you're going to have that in a nice bowl. And, you can start to visualize it. Or if you're more of a burger and, going to have a nice juicy burger with,
Oh,
some little
you
chips
know,
on
you're
the side.
making that you're
Yeah.
making that happen right now, it's
And
that
that's
that
all that
sensation
cephalic
in the
stage
mouth, isn't it?
before the food
Mwah.
even comes into the mouth. And it's,
Mm,
and when you sort of think, yeah, that's, there's no touching of the food at all. You could just have that now and that your mouth waters, doesn't it? It's just sort of whichever one you're into,
yeah,
that's why I was trying to
absolutely.
do both. There's
No,
lots in
yeah.
between, obviously. Um, but yeah, you're right that it's just, people just think it's just eating.
Yeah, but it's not, isn't it? And then the question is, why won't they eat it? Just eat. It's actually what we need to be thinking about is what is this eating experience like from the child's perspective? And we need to think about that smell might be overwhelming for a
Yeah.
child. The temperature could be wrong.
Yeah.
Two foods touching each other, right?
Who would have thought that that actually is such a big thing? But it is.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
And this good one, right? They ate a banana yesterday. and suddenly they don't like bananas today. We love, we see that all the time as well. And that
Yeah.
is because, our sensory, needs change from day to day. And it's, not necessarily that they're never going to like bananas again, but that's what their body wanted. That's what their senses needed yesterday. And they don't need or want that today.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's thinking about what the child, I'm going to say this and I might get backlash, but what does the child think is acceptable? And
Yeah.
what I mean by that is, things in the child, it's about that predictability. You know, this, interestingly, even the change in packaging on food can impact, that it's the trust in the food. I think there's so much linked to food in
Yeah.
terms of all of those senses. But also, if we go to gut health, and obviously this is your arena, not mine, but from my own experiences. So I struggle with a condition called emetophobia, which is a fear of sickness. And some people, not necessarily me, I like to eat. Um, some people with emetophobia really struggle with trust. I mentioned the word trust
Mm.
earlier, trust in food. So I went through a long time where I wouldn't eat food that wasn't cooked by certain members of my family because I was worried that I might get food poisoning or it might make me ill. I wouldn't eat at restaurants for a long time. You mentioned burgers earlier, and steak and things like that. I used to ask for my steak, for example, to be really, really well done. Like totally, like make sure there's no pink
Yeah.
inside it at all. Whereas as I've grown and developed, I eat it differently now. Please don't hurt me, anybody. But but what I'm trying to say is, from a child's perspective, those changes, there's that element of trust in food because they're still learning, they're young, and it's those experiences. I'm not saying they have a condition like I do. What I'm saying is I can see it from the perspective of the child. The changes and that unpredictability and that uncertainty can actually have an impact on the trust of what they're going to be eating as well, which not necessarily adults will understand. Well, it's so what the packaging changed, but actually
It's the same thing,
that
but
might be because
actually, yeah, it isn't.
is
Yeah.
what's inside different.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we're in our household, we have a thing that if the carrot is cut in circles, then we'll
Yeah.
eat it.
Yeah.
But if it's cut in battens, then we can't eat it.
Oh gosh. And obviously
And it's the way it's the
batten.
presentation, and apparently it tastes completely different. And I have tried the carrot in both ways, and I'm just thinking it's just carrot. To me, it's
Yeah.
just a carrot. But in our house, it's
Yeah.
not just a carrot. It's actually, it's that sort of
Yeah.
visually being able to
Yeah.
sort of see that.
Yeah.
But then you sort of, if you go from that visual sort of side of things, that it needs to visually
Hmm.
feel safe, it needs to
Yeah.
be predictable in how
Yeah.
it looks.
Yeah.
You also sort of think you were talking earlier about the sort of sensory side of things. You're also thinking about the texture of that food. So for some of our children, when we're thinking about their sensory processing differences, it seems like they're like graze eating. They are constantly eating all the time. And you're just like, and in the holiday time, that's when we sort of, or the
I'm
weekends, we kind of
hungry. I'm
notice.
hungry. I'm
And
hungry.
you're just like, you have just eaten. But sometimes it's not just that they're not recognizing that they've just eaten, and we're thinking about interoception and our children's ability to actually feel full and recognize the
Mm.
hunger, that side of things. But it can also be um, around our children needing certain textures. So
Yeah.
when we're sort of crunching and biting down. So we'll use the carrot example, but it might not be the carrot, it might be the breadsticks, it may be crisps. And all of a
Hmm.
sudden, you just notice that they're always wanting toast,
Yeah.
they're wanting breadsticks, they're crisps, and it's constantly that crunching down. And we're looking for that deep pressure,
Yeah.
that deep touch, that because we have those touch sensations inside our mouth.
Yeah.
So often we just think it's just food, but actually it could be helping regulate our children in,
Yeah.
with regards to their sensory process. So if they're finding something difficult, they will need to have the food, they're sorry, it's me crunching on a carrot
Yeah.
there. If you're just joining us, that's me crunching on a carrot, not looking a bit strange. Just caught myself
Nothing else,
doing that.
nothing else, nothing else.
Oh, oh, yes, but yes. So yeah, so
Um,
that's what I'll
and
do. But
yeah,
yeah, it's just but you when you on the outside and you just sort of think our children when we're thinking about the word fussy, you're sort of thinking actually, if you look at it in that, through that lens, actually they're looking for foods that can help regulate and calm their body for the
yeah,
situation they're in. So it's not actually fussy. They're actually very clever because
yeah,
they realize that actually eating a breadstick, having toast, those sort of things is actually going to help their nervous system.
yeah, absolutely. And that could be why they don't like banana. They're not saying that they don't like the banana when they say they don't like the banana. They're saying that that texture, and I'm sorry, I'm going to introduce Inspector
Ah,
Banana at that
oh, I
point.
love.
They're
Does
saying
he have a name?
just Inspector Banana, and he
Oh,
is my friend. He's my friend from Tiny Tums, who Tiny Tums is a specialist nutritionist. So,
oh, I
yeah,
love Inspector
got a
Banana.
little
I love her.
little cutie there that is. But what the children are saying is, that they can't tolerate the banana
Mm.
today. But they don't know how to use that language. So they say, I don't like the banana.
Yeah.
And when we have a child who is craving that crunch for the
Mhm.
regulation, um, they, and you pop on their plate the typical chicken nuggets, mashed potato, and beans, and you've separated it out because you know you have to, they're
Yeah.
not necessarily going to eat that mashed potato. And I think what's quite important is to think about, they've been grazing all day on the crunchy things. They've eaten the chicken nuggets. The chicken nuggets provide just enough of that bite that they want. And then you're saying, as a parent, we're trying to get them to eat a little bit more at tea time. So we're saying, come on, just one more bite. But actually, while we're trying to be encouraging and hopefully not getting too stressed, because it can be quite stressful for us as parents, is we're adding a layer of pressure onto the child.
Un,
Um,
we're not doing it conscious. It's not
no,
conscious.
we're
And there's
trying
no,
to
obviously,
encourage.
again, no
No
judgment.
judgment on it. We've all done
So,
it. We've all done it.
yeah,
Oh, just one more bite, and to us, that's encouragement. Please eat your dinner. But actually, to the child's point of view and from the child's perspective, that is actually an added layer of pressure. And that, as we know and we witness as parents or carers, is that pressure builds into a battleground at meal times, and we spoke in our last episode, didn't we, Charmaine, about the wrong color cup can give
yeah.
can get the day,
We
set
said
the
about
day
the
off
red or the
wrong.
blue. Who knew that that could be a
But
real thing? But it is.
it's, we end up with versions of that in the mealtime, but from the food, the wrong color plate, how the food is touching, and then actually getting food into the body. And that battleground, I think we need to, look at making sure that we're not turning food into some form of, and eating into some form of obedience. Because, parents are worried that nutrition
Yeah, because
matters,
it's a
which is,
natural thing, isn't it? It's a
of
natural,
course, yeah.
it's our, when we go back to, back to caveman times, it's a
Mhm.
basic thing. We feed our family and
Yeah,
that just, that's what we do. We have that
yeah,
basic food. But actually, when, like what you're saying, this isn't about our children just eating. As we said, it's meeting so many different needs, isn't it? It's not just about food. It's it's so much more, and that's what we're trying to sort of get to the bottom of, but no pun intended. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And parents are worried because nutrition matters, doesn't it? But it's completely understandable to want your child to have a variety and enough nourishment. But repeatedly forcing, bribing, or that conflict around food can actually make the whole experience feel even less safe for the child. So sometimes before we sort of um, ask the child, we ask a child to expand what they eat and, bringing that variety, we actually need to think about predictability and safe eating first, so we can get that eating going. And I think one of the reasons food belongs in, Poo2Play conversations really naturally is because eating, does not just affect nutrition, it affects energy. Energy affects regulation. And if a child has eaten very little, gone a long time without food, or simply doesn't recognize that they are hungry, we may see this through the behavior. Um, they're not able to regulate their
Yep.
emotions because they are hungry or hangry, as I keep saying. You know, and this through this behavior can happen before anyone sort of like realizes what's happening. It can come out of nowhere. Adults know what being hungry can do to us. We can become irritable, our concentration just sort of
Yep.
dissipates, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Small things feel really big and dramatic. Then we have like the headache, the physical symptoms like the headaches, the feeling shaky, and the struggling to think,
Yeah,
clearly.
definitely.
Children experience those same things, but they can't say, they may not have the language to say, my blood sugar's dropped.
Yeah.
They might not even be able to say or recognize, I am hungry. It may be as simple as that. They may not be able to communicate that yet.
Yeah.
So,
And especially
yeah.
when we're sort of thinking about that interoception. So when
Hmm.
we're thinking about interoception, one of the eight senses, we're thinking about being able to recognize that you're hungry and also
Yeah.
recognize when you're full. So if
Yeah.
you've got that, they may not, if they're struggling with some of their other senses, so like your sense of smell, and we're thinking about that cephalic stage, and
Yeah.
actually they can start to smell the food, that is actually almost sort of when we're thinking about the nervous system and the brain, we're thinking about that sort of emotional sort of side of the brain actually kicking in and
Mm.
saying, this is dangerous. The body needs protecting from this, what is coming. And therefore, they may not be able to recognize those signals,
Exactly.
recognize when they're actually, the hunger.
Yeah.
So it
And
happens both
yeah,
ways, doesn't it?
yeah, exactly that. And f- interestingly enough, this links really well to our last episode where we talked about sleep. And when we talked about sleep, we talked about routines and we talked about having set meal times, didn't we, Charmaine?
Yep.
So do go back to our previous episode because it was absolutely brilliant. If you're struggling with children and their sleep, it's one to listen to.
Yep.
Okay. But in terms of struggling to get them to eat because of different things such as sensory and things like that, bringing in a routine will bring that safety. that
Yeah.
predictability. It's not just necessarily about what food is put in front of them, it's about that routine
Yeah,
as
it's
well.
such and
So they
such a
know,
time. It's
yeah, it means
breakfast. It's
food is
such and such
coming.
a time.
Yeah,
It's whatever. And they know
absolutely.
what those options. So then it then becomes not just the time of the routine, it
Yeah.
then becomes, when it's breakfast, there's either a bowl there or a plate. I know what's coming. So it's there. Or I have my bowl of cereal and I have a smoothie to drink, or I have my toast and I have um, some fruit in the bowl. Whatever it is, it's sort of it's that every time, and that becomes predictable, and that then means that our children's nervous system don't have to think about that. It's
Yeah.
then safe for them. And then when we're looking at lunch, you know, we're thinking about what are those options. And there
Mhm.
can be lots of different options, and that's why sometimes you sort of see that children will have, a jam sandwich, for instance, every single day for X amount of time. And then all of a sudden, like you said earlier about like with the banana, don't have jam sandwiches anymore. But you love
Yeah.
jam sandwiches. I've got a year's supply of jam here. We've got to make the jam sandwich. But that's because that is now part of the routine.
Yeah.
It's now predictable. Okay, I feel safe with that.
Safe
I
to
can
try
now,
something else.
yeah, I can try something else.
Yeah, and that's a really positive thing, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
Charmaine, in terms of your experiences with your families and your children, what is, if children aren't feeling safe with food, then they're going to limit the intake of food. How is
Yeah.
that affecting everything that's going on inside the body in terms of
Yeah. So
digestion and poo and all
yeah,
that?
so when we say sort of like limit the foods, we're thinking about maybe sort of five, maybe three sort of key foods. I've worked with some families where it's literally, I think we've got down to about three. There was three foods that they would have,
Mm.
and they would repeat those for breakfast, lunch, evening meal. It would be the same food, but not sort of like a breakfast food. It was like either like a biscuit or a something. It was those
Mhm.
foods. So, and sometimes what we're looking at is that they can't necessarily, some of our children struggle, not can't, but they struggle to actually have those at set times. So, what we would obviously encourage is to have a breakfast, a lunch, an evening meal. But when we're trying to establish that, it can be really difficult because our children can't eat at those set times. So, initially, we're looking at little and often because we just want to try and build that appetite up. But when we're
Mm.
thinking about that and the gut health, we're thinking about so when we're eating, the whole idea of the gut health is that, or the gut is that we eat the food, it's broken down, it then goes down the esophagus, it's then broken down further in the stomach, goes to the small bowel, and then to the large bowel. And then obviously it turns into the poo, and then it comes into the bottom, and then that's when our children know that they need to go. But if they're not, and that whole process quickens up 20 to 30 minutes after they had something to eat. If they're eating at all different times, small meals, big meals, all different times throughout the day, then it then means that that whole cycle of our children eating not only influences when and how they poo and wee, it then obviously influences the type of poos and wees that we see as well. So it means that there can be like a build up of those poos inside because, we're not having enough fluid intake or drinks. The food content maybe hasn't got a lot of, like if you had like cucumber, for instance, it has sort of X amount percentage being a water content. If you have like a watermelon, we know that got a water content to it, whatever. And that's similar with lots of different foods. They all
Mm.
have like a fluid intake. But if we're not getting that from the foods, it then means that our children need to drink more to
Mhm.
then help those food, help because the water is absorbed into the large bowel, meaning that it makes our poos nice and soft. But if they're not getting it from the food, we then need to have it from the drink. And sometimes it means that our children aren't able to drink enough to keep those poos soft, and we get that build up because they're not having enough of the foods that their body needs at that time.
Yeah. And we know, don't we, that getting children to drink is often a challenge on its own.
Yeah,
And that can be a long-standing challenge for many, many years into adulthood and forever, getting people, children, to drink enough because drinking actually requires the act of remembering to have a drink and have a drink to hand, go and get
yeah.
a drink, you know,
And
and
so,
if they're
yeah,
concentrating and busy and playing, they're just not going to remember that, are they? And I think we
no,
have many parents, and I've been one of these parents, where I've had to go to the teacher in the preschool or the school and say, please, please ensure you encourage my child to drink because she won't remember otherwise.
yeah,
And, they come out dehydrated from school. So,
yeah.
yeah.
And I was going to
Mm,
say that obviously is linked to the interoception as well. So if our
yeah,
children can't recognize when they're thirsty because of the interoception
yeah,
sense,
yeah,
they're not gonna, it could be that they're then remembering, but also that they don't feel, and they need to be able to feel thirsty to then action of drinking. And the same with the hungry, they need to feel hungry to
yeah,
do the action of eating. And if they don't feel it,
yeah,
then it's like, no, I don't want to eat or I don't want to drink because they don't feel that. And it's
yeah,
almost like us encouraging. It's a bit, I often sort of think about like if it's like with us with adults, you know, if we were sort of kept saying, come on, Sam, drink this, and you've just literally downed a whole big bottle of water, and I keep saying, drink this, you don't feel thirsty because
yeah.
you've just drunk.
And you can feel
And
it
that's
in your body
yeah,
at the moment.
yeah,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
what's happening with our children,
Yeah.
except for they may have not had anything and they're still feeling they're not necessarily recognizing that
That's
sensation.
it, isn't it? It's that recognition. They're so engrossed in what they're doing that, they simply forget. Their body
Yeah,
doesn't feel it. They simply forget. We, as parents, may be like, but you have to try and remember. Surely you feel thirsty. But actually, as a child, somebody young, if they're so focused on an activity, it just doesn't become to the
yeah.
forefront of their mind
And
at
that's
all. And
obviously
it's
where the
not,
routine helps, isn't it? That's
yeah,
why we say
exactly.
about the routine, because
Hmm.
the routine can then help kickstart the body, but it
Yeah,
also helps with the interoception as well for our children
absolutely.
to recognize that. I was going to say actually
Mm.
about because we were saying about our children sometimes when those emotions sort of like build up, um, and just how that sort of connection with the gut, the brain, the eating, and like with the poo as well. So when
Yeah,
we're sort of thinking about our children having like a build up of poo, so we're sort of stuck in that sort of eating and drinking cycle, that build up of poo, um, it then means that for many of our children, they can then sort of crave more of those sort of like the carbohydrates, to sort of high sort of sweet content. So it means that you could have like more of the breads, more of the, those, the sugary type foods, which in turn can then lead to more build up,
yeah,
which in turn means they can't recognize. So we're in this
yeah,
cycle, which then, when there's a build up, we're thinking about the gut brain connection. So what's
yeah,
happening in the gut influences our children's thoughts and feelings, which then influences their behavior. So we're just sort of thinking about that cycle, and what
yeah,
Kelly Mallow, who's an occupational therapist who studies about interoception. So what she always says is that breaking the cycle.
yeah.
So we're breaking
Exactly.
that, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly that. And it goes back to that whole child message as well. If a child's tummy feels uncomfortable because they've ended up bloating themselves, you mentioned with the bread, and the carbohydrates, it's that internal craving, isn't it?
Yep.
And that is because they haven't had enough of that, or because their energy stores are running low. So they end up
Yep.
craving the carbohydrates. They're blocking themselves up. When it comes to meal times, it's going to.
Unconsciously, I may just add. They're
Yes.
not doing it intentionally.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to meal times, they might feel uncomfortable, sitting at the table. I know
Yeah.
after I've had my Christmas dinner, I do not want to sit at that table
It's
anymore.
almost like you want to be sort of laying at a certain angle.
Exactly.
Let's just go
No,
and lay down. No more, thank you.
they're bloated, constipated, or worried about pooing as well, because I know you work with a lot of children who worry about going to the toilet. So that can also lead to affecting appetite, what they're willing to eat. It will affect their sleep and their energy and their mood, their play, the concentration. And then that relationship between the food and the gut health can become really complicated.
Yeah.
And eating begins to make their tummy feel more uncomfortable, so they become more reluctant to eat. So from sort of food to focus, then, so from sort of what, sorry, I digressed a little
Yeah, yeah.
just to give a bit of additional background, but like moving into the focus, if a child is struggling to concentrate, I think one of the most useful things that we can do is to widen that sort of thought or lens before we decide what that difficulty means. So we need to be curious, don't we? You know, instead of why aren't they listening, to me as a parent,
Yeah.
we might need to be looking, at other questions. Have they eaten? Are they hydrated? Did they sleep well? Are they physically comfortable? Do they need the toilet? Is the room overwhelming? Are they anxious? All of these questions. And then, of course, there's the sensory elements as well. Aside from the overwhelm, it's like trying to manage the texture, smell, or sensory experiences um, that, adults might barely notice. Focus is not about just willingness to do it. And I think that's sometimes what we misunderstand focus as being.
Yeah.
The
And we
brain
mentioned
actually,
about that, didn't we? About that um, capability and
yeah,
capacity, isn't it? So it's not
yes,
that they
yeah,
they can't
yes, it's
focus,
not
but
about the
in that
capability.
moment, they may not have that capacity to be able
Exactly
to.
that.
And that's what you were saying about with
100%.
your, it's almost like a mental sort of tick list with all those things that you were talking about, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely, they need enough safety, energy, and regulation to be able to focus in. So several things could actually be happening at once at this point, because we talked about sleep in the last episode. So the child might have slept badly because their tummy was uncomfortable. We spoke a lot about that. Then they wake up tired. Breakfast is difficult because they do not feel hungry or the foods available are overwhelming.
Yeah.
They arrive at school or nursery with very little fuel in their bodies. Everything around them is noisy. The classroom is noisy. They've not had a comfortable bowel movement. Then we ask them to sit down. We ask them to listen and ignore everything that their body is actually telling them that they need right now, which is sleep and food
Food
that's going to
and
help them
go to the toilet.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly that. And this is, exactly your idea, or everyone's idea, what we're trying to say about capacity. Does the child have the capacity right now? And I think that's much more of a compassionate and useful question when
Yeah,
we're looking at the child,
definitely.
and what the
And I
child
think
needs.
and I think
Mm,
also when you're sort of thinking about when we're asking children, like if they're at a preschool or a nursery, or if
mm,
they're in a school, that whole sort of, the idea of compliance about our
mm.
children, just come in and you sit down.
Yeah,
That's what you do. But actually, does that child need to come in and to move their whole body? Because actually moving their body can get,
things
think about
going.
get
Mm.
those poos moving, literally. It then means if that's moving, it then means that they would then be able to eat if they need
Yeah,
to sort of eat, but also then they're going to be able to concentrate and focus.
yeah.
So it's
It,
just sort of looking at that, it's shifting away from, when we come in here, this is what we do. And it's just sort of like, this is what we as the adults are saying to do. But actually, let's see that through the child's eyes. Let's see, you know, when we're thinking about meal times, if that child is wandering around. So I work with lots of families where their children will be wandering around. They'll come over, pick something, and they'll be walking around, come back
mm,
over. Yep, something else, and then we're off. And we can be doing that. Like some families will say to me, "Oh my goodness, we started mealtime at 12 o'clock. By 2 o'clock, we may have like halfway through the meal because we're sort of,
yeah,
you know." But
yeah,
that in itself, so, from an outside, and we're thinking about compliance, we're
mm,
thinking, just sit that child down. That's what we need to do. But actually, their behavior, what we're seeing, is telling us
yeah.
maybe sitting down is not too comfy. What type of foods are
Mm,
they picking out? Maybe they're trying to help regulate themselves. You know, just by seeing that child wandering around and it's taking that long, is it taking that long because actually they're full and
yeah,
actually they can only eat that small amount because there's not the room
yeah.
for that food to get down? Because when you sort of think about, I'll show you my picture. But if you sort of think about where the large bowel is and where the
Mm,
stomach is, if there's poo in here, that's going to be pressing on the
yeah.
stomach, and that's then going to be uncomfortable. So we need to, when we're looking at our children, look, what are they actually telling us, but without the words?
Yes, exactly that. Exactly that. And I think families carry a lot of anxiety around food because there's all this pressure, isn't there, about what a
What they
child
should
should
do.
eat.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Oh,
What
it
is
makes you feel all
acceptable?
funny,
What
doesn't
is the
it?
yeah, it does. Um, and we understand that nutrition matters. We're not taking that away.
No, we're
We're
not.
not taking that away at all. What we want to take away is the pressure that is put on yourselves, on ourselves. Because yes, nutrition matters, but I think we need to look at the relationship with the food first. You know, is the child frightened at meal times? Do they expect conflict at meal times? Just sit at the table, just eat it, just do this,
Or
because
the
that's,
old-fashioned, you're not leaving this table until that plate's clean.
yeah, and no pudding until you've eaten your main.
Ooh.
Yeah. Ooh.
We are not saying that,
We
by the
don't.
way.
You know, are adults anxious before the plate even arrives? Because that anxiety from the adult, because the adult's also thinking the same thing, I'm gonna have conflict here.
And
That is
yeah,
pushing on. Yeah, it's pushing
you
on
don't you
to the
don't realize.
child.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think as parents, we don't often realize like how we are coming across as well. It's sort of, and we're not doing it intentionally. There's no blame in this at all.
Mm,
It's just that we just don't realize that if we're feeling quite tense, maybe our shoulders may be up,
yeah.
maybe we're not sort of, you know, the smile, we're like, that, we're frowning sort of thing. And without
Yeah.
even know, we're waiting
Yeah. For
to,
that conflict to
yeah,
begin, because
it's because our body is in
we
that
just
sort of
know.
fight,
Yeah.
flight, freeze for, we're
Yeah.
in that,
Yeah.
ourselves. And it's just, if we sort of remove that, like you say, it's, that's what our children are going to be picking up on. And it's not
Exactly.
about blaming the parents. That's not what we're saying at all. It's just, looking at the whole picture and just seeing that, it's not our children's fault and it's not our family's fault that maybe eating isn't happening. It's just looking at what could we, just breaking it down, how
Mm,
can we help? Our children are telling us something. It's almost having, you said about the banana detective, having that detective, hat on sort of thing, and just saying, what is it that they're telling us? And trying to sort of look at it in a different way. It's not about the fact that, you as a parent has spent all that time, you've maybe been working, you spent all that time preparing that meal, you put the meal down, you're doing it with love and affection because you want your child to eat, and then they just push it away. And
Yeah,
it's completely understandable how that can feel personal, but it isn't. It
absolutely.
isn't at all. They're
It
not doing that on purpose, isn't it?
and I think changes can be really small to help this situation, can't they?
Yeah,
And, we're not saying that you want to transform the entire family diet, overnight, because that's too much. That's too much pressure on yourself. And one thing that we need to remove is pressure off of the parents and the carers. There's so much pressure when it
yeah,
comes to eating and nutrition, and we need to take that away. So maybe the first change that you could put in is reducing the comments to the child about how much they've eaten. So eating just becomes a thing that they have to do. They have to eat rather than a battle. So let's not make it. My tummy's grumbling then. That's interesting, isn't it? It's all this talk about food. So, I think that we need to almost remove the conversations and the questioning around
yep,
food. So eating just becomes a routine. It's
yep.
necessary. It's part of the day, as opposed to, battle. So reducing those comments about how much a child has eaten, sitting together and making the child, without making the child's plate the center of the conversation.
Mm.
So, just allowing the eating to happen naturally. You're sat together, you're eating, child's eating, but there's no competition, there's no discussion about how much is left on the plate. I think it's difficult. It will take time for a parent to sort of
And also, I think that's,
manage to
yeah.
remove
And I
that.
think that's it's sort of, because obviously when we talk, we're sort of talking about, things that we can help with all children. But there are some children where actually, our aim is to maybe to sit together, but for them, they
Mm,
might not be able to. I mean, I know that some families that I've worked with before where they'd moved to a new house. Obviously, I'm not saying that we need to do this, but they'd moved to a new house. They were naturally moving to a new house anyway, and they were designing the kitchen, and their child was finding it really difficult to be with them at the
mm,
table, and they desperately wanted to be with them at the table, and they all wanted to be together, but the child couldn't because of the smell. And the smell would then trigger, and that would be like an alarm for their brain.
yeah.
They couldn't do that. So, what they did is they designed the kitchen in such a way that it had the breakfast bar, one part, and they had the lower part where it had like the actual table. So the family were at one end for the table, and then the child was at the breakfast bar. So they were in the same room,
Mhm.
but they weren't necessarily at the table. So they
Too
could still
close. Yeah.
see
Yeah.
the food, and they could, it's almost like I can see what you've got there, but actually they were still together. And it's just this whole, like we say, that pressure, that society thing
Yeah.
that you have to sit at the table. So if your listeners is thinking, we can't even be in the same room,
Mhm.
we get it. It's starting where your child is,
Yeah, exactly.
your child, and what we suggest are ideas, aren't they?
Yeah,
And it's,
absolutely. But when you are sitting together or apart, it's just making sure that the child's plate is not the center of the
yeah,
conversation, I think.
definitely. Yeah.
I think strategies such as putting at least one trusted food on the table, as well, and maybe slowly introducing a new food to exist nearby, but without necessarily forcing them to try it or taste it. Just, having it there because they might be curious about it themselves. They've got their trusted food, and later on, you might introduce something new alongside the trusted food, not instead of. I would advise if you're really struggling
Yeah.
to get food intake in. Um, if you notice as well that your child eats better earlier in the day than they do when they're exhausted in the evening, which is something we sort of mentioned a little bit on the previous episode, is the exhaustion that they have in the evening, or in the opposite way, the
Yep.
exhaustion that they might have at breakfast.
And that obviously can affect the
Notice,
capacity then, can't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
notice when they eat the most in their pattern in their day, and that is a good time to, you know, give food to them for
Yeah.
eating, and reduce the battle. And I think as well, maybe realizing that constipation needs proper attention as well
Yeah.
before expecting their appetite to suddenly
Yep.
improve. Um,
And it's that
and
whole thing about starting inside and then outside. So it's almost like outside is the food part. And we're
yeah,
saying, let's start inside. Let's
yeah,
look at that poo.
yeah,
Then we can sort of start looking at different foods and
yeah,
doing that. But while there's the constipation, let's just keep it
yeah,
safe, predictable. Isn't
yeah.
that?
Yeah. And Charmaine, just for our new listeners, with your poo chart, would you just remind us what, um, healthy poos look like, and
Yeah.
and what the signs of constipation might be?
Yeah. So we might be, so when we're talking about our healthy poos, we're talking about our type 4 medium poos. And we're thinking about it being nice and soft, and medium being the size. Because if we're looking at our children passing large or extra large poos, or if they're not passing a type 4 poo, or if they're going several days without going. So we're looking at our type 4 poo either 3 times a day or 3 or 4 times a week. And if you're not seeing that, it could be something that may influence their eating. Because, like we said, that poo build-up can push on the stomach, and that can then lead to our children not being able to eat, or struggling to eat, or appearing, as we said at the beginning, to be fussy. But
Yes.
actually, they're not. It's because there's something actually preventing them, and them only picking at certain foods is their behavior, their communication, their way of telling us that something's in there. So when we're thinking about the poo, that's what we're thinking about there.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And you mentioned about fussy there, and I think when we notice that a child is starting to be what we call fussy, that is when we need to really think about things like what's going on inside the body, but also that sort of regulation as well, that predictability to support that.
Yeah,
Because we might notice that a child cannot focus or has barely eaten because there's too much going on around them, refusing dinner because they're exhausted and overwhelmed by the end of the
yeah,
day. We might, see that we might actually discover when we really look into it that a child is limiting what they eating because it's painful when they're going to the toilet. And they know that eating means they will need to go for a poo at some point. And if they're struggling with that, they don't want to then eat because they don't want to go to the toilet. So when children start to realize that link, that may cause eating problems as well. Um, but
it's
also, we
all
might just
connected, isn't
realize,
it? It's all
yeah,
connected.
it is. It is. And, sometimes we might just actually realize that a child experiences food differently than we do. And it's all about the senses and sensory. Um, and I think I would say to our listeners now, instead of asking something like, how do I make them eat? Because that's quite a pressured question, isn't it? We want to have curious questions. We like being
Yeah.
curious. So, what would help make eating safer, or feel safer? What is their body struggling with is something that you can look at. What support can you put in place? What can you change around them? You spoke about that kitchen, didn't you? And that
And we're
made
not
a
saying
massive.
everybody should
No, no,
redesign their
no.
kitchen.
They had a big
Just in case there's
renovation.
some bills coming through to me.
But,
That's not what we're saying.
but there could be
Just
a way
looking
that you
about
could
it. Yeah.
sit at opposite ends of the table,
Yeah.
things
I mean, like, but yeah. So, for
like.
example, like where people haven't redesigned their kitchen, there have been families that I've worked with where you had the dining table, and then the the dining table was in the lounge, for instance, so it's like a lounge diner. Um, and then so the family were at the table, and then maybe the child had a little pop-up table on the sofa, or the other way round.
Yeah.
Or they had a dining table in the kitchen, so it was a kitchen diner, and then the sofa they could actually see. So it's almost sort of you're there, but not too close type thing. So
Yeah.
it's, it's far enough away so the smells and can't actually see the food. So some,
Yeah.
I've worked with some children where they can't actually even see certain types of food, like you were mentioned before, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so they can't do that either. So it's yeah, no redesigning of kitchens. It's fine. But we're just saying that was just one example.
Everyone's rushing to get a bank loan to
Yeah.
redesign the kitchen now. No. Okay. But no, I think that, the thread running through all of these Poo2Play conversations that we're having is that we're not ignoring the behaviors that are being presented. What we're doing is getting curious about what is sitting beneath
Yeah.
those behaviors.
Yeah.
So I think that can close us now.
Mm.
So, as we talk about staying curious, let's say stay curious.
Because every behavior is telling a story.
From Poo
From
to
Poo to
Play,
Play,
we're
we're
here
here
to
to
help
help
you
you
understand
understand
what might
what
be
might be
happening
happening
beneath the
beneath the
surface.
surface.
Almost there. Oh, thank you
Thank,
so much for joining
yeah,
me, Charmaine, and thank you
thank
to
you.
everybody who's been listening to us
Yeah,
as well.
I'll speak to you soon.
Bye.